Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, public education advocates. It's the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we share the practice, the pedagogy, and the politics currently happening in public education. As always, I ask that you write your name in the comments when you come in and let me know your thoughts, your comments, your questions about the topic being discussed. I'm a longtime teacher, so I enjoy having active participating class during the show. So if you would, write your name in there and let us know your questions. And if you listen later, do the same, because I'll get notified, and if you have a question, I'll answer it as quickly as I can. We have an interesting subject today, as always, and that is the current Asian racism that we're seeing. And to join us and talk further about this and hopefully offer some solutions that you and your families and your schools can implement, we have Daniel Eng. And so, Daniel, tell a little bit about your background, and I know that you're a prominent leader in the Asian community. So tell us a little bit more about that. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Dr. Good. So, my name is Daniel Eng, and, I'm the past president for the Asian Real Estate Association of America in the Dallas-Fort Worth chapter. And, I'm also on the boards for other AAPI organizations as well. And, just been a big advocate in helping a lot of first immigrants coming in, Asian Americans, and also the second and third generation Asian Americans, because sometimes we kind of lose our roots and understand, because, for me, I was born in Dallas. My parents came from Hong Kong. Actually, mom was born in a small village in China and then went to Hong Kong and then later to the U.S. But, racism, I think in general it's always been around, right? It's not even the Asian, what social media and the media has been put, it's always been there. Growing up in Plano, I felt that as well. But, I think media and the way everything is escalated through that has changed, But, my background, I do real estate. I do commercial real estate. I went to school in Europe. I went to a small college called Franklin University in Switzerland. And I think it was a great experience for me, because being an Asian American, growing up in the U.S., having the ability to go away from the U.S. for my education and kind of see a different perspective of the U.S. in a different country. And I think that gave me a better insight, because it was a very international setting, because we had over 51 countries representing the school and only 350 students at that time. So it was really like a UN setting at my school. Right. So.
Well, and you're bringing back a lot of memories. The Asian community is very close to my heart. I was very fortunate as a child to grow up not only in Latin America. My father was a banker in the international division. I grew up in Latin America, and then at the age of 12, went to Hong Kong and lived there a couple of years. That was 1970. And then lived in Singapore the last year before coming back here. And I am a board member in the Asia World pageant and competition. And I did that with Anthony Tran a couple of years ago. And so the Asian community is, again, very close to my heart. It's and probably closer to my heart than a lot of people from my community, because I not only grew up over there and had similar experiences, again, very, very lucky to have an international childhood. I think I came back a different type of American, I think. One more respectful of different cultural communities. But then being able to actively associate with Asians, it's just world. And so this has been something I just don't understand. And so help us make sense of this, and what can we do to get back to just treating people as we want to be treated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for you, your background as an educator, I think it really does go back to the education. It goes back to the home, right? Because as you know, as children growing up, the environment also affects us, and also the parenting. You know, I think it also goes back to that but you know, it's hard to because the U.S. There's so many. We're a melting pot. We have so much different. We have a mixture of cultures, and sometimes if people aren't able to get out of their city or their state, I mean, some people don't even travel, right? So it's very hard for them to understand other cultures if they're not educated, right? It's really going back to that education, you know.
So, and let's actually, I think we need to educate our audience a little bit. Can you define the Asian culture, people? Because I think people are always surprised who's included in that Asian melting pot itself, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have the large country, which is China, right? And from that you have Japan, you have Korea, you have Thailand, and even Taiwan, even though it's a separate country, but I don't want to get in the politics of that. They're Chinese too. But the writing is different because China uses a simplified Chinese, and Taiwan and Hong Kong use a traditional writing of Chinese. So even that in the language is different, because they have dialects. So even within China, there's so many dialects in that culture because you have the Muslim influence on the west side of China. So their food is very different. The spices are different. And then you have the southern Chinese where, the spices are different and they eat more rice. But up north in China, they don't have rice. So they eat more of a bread type, so the food, so you can always identify by the food, right? So and that's I think that's what makes Asia very great because it's so many different cultures. The food is very different, and I think people can be educated by going to like an Asian fair and just trying different foods, the flavors. Then like, whoa, it's very different, you know. But yeah, and you have Indian, which is like a East Asian culture, Southeast Asian culture, and a lot of people don't know that Indians are Asian and they're not Middle East, But of course, they do have Middle East influence, right? Because Pakistan is majority is a Muslim culture, and Indian is more of a Hindu culture. So, but within India, there's different groups too. So, and the food is different.
That's right. So. Northern, Southern Indian, you're right. So again, a lot of people don't think of Bangladesh, Pakistan, India as part of
Burma. Yep.
Yeah, I know I'm missing Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Korea. Just a huge, huge community if one were to count all the countries and people and so forth. And so and I had to have that reminded when we did the pageant, because we weren't only looking for girls from Japan and China, we were looking for India, Pakistan, and so forth. So again, even within those communities, you have people who need to learn to get along, right? Even within Pakistan. But
well, I mean, you look at history, right? You look at how much fighting in those countries, and and just trying to take over territory, and it's always ongoing. We always have that. I mean, I look at the racism. I mean, racism is very apparent in those countries too, right? It's not just an American thing. It really comes from that education from the home.
Sure, you have the caste system in India that they have not really made as big of an attempt, I think, to overcome that as they should. But so have you always felt racism, whether in the United States, Europe, when you were over there?
I mean, I felt it in Europe too. as a Asian looking person. They don't know that I'm American, but when I go over there, it's because of my skin color. I did feel some racism in Switzerland. Because Swiss is, even though it's a neutral country, but they like their ways of doing things, and if you change the ways of doing things, they look at you differently or they comment a different way. And when I went to travel to France and just different part in Italy, you felt that too. But you just have to adapt certain ways to because you're in their country, learning their customs. And I think that's another thing. And I was very fortunate to do that during my college years, to learn, eat, and make friends in those countries. And I think in the U.S. we can learn. The thing is, we're always learning, and as our country becomes more diverse, we need to have programs where we understand different cultures and even understand the American culture, where we came from too, right? And how we
Sure.
started and things like that. So, the U.S. culture, the American culture is still very new, and it's always evolving. So that's another thing, is it doesn't stop. So we always just have to, from our education in the 80s and 90s, and then now in the 2020 2021 now, we still need to educate our young generation, because they may be second and third generation, and they lost their culture, where their families came from too. So I was fortunate during my summer years. My parents sent me to Hong Kong, and I stayed with my grandparents. So I have a lot of ties back in Hong Kong. So when I go back to Hong Kong and bring my children, I tell them where I went to eat when as a kid, and I try, if we have relatives, I try to go visit them as well.
Hmm.
I think it's very important, and that my children also remember kind of where they came from, and
Sure.
when they're in the U.S., just to be blessed and be grateful, but also understand, like, if people comment or indifferent, it's okay, but it's not okay when becomes violent and hatred, right? Because we see a lot of hatred in where racism comes out of. Sometimes it's just how you say it. It's not meaningful. It's not meaning to be a hatred, but it just comes out from some people that way, and we need to educate them.
So, Daniel, we're hearing more, even though there's been a subtle layer of racism um, in the Asian towards the Asian community. I was reading on sort of that the Asians have had a sort of a high status with the white community, but that just meant you didn't get as much racism as other cultures, like the African American culture, for example. But lately, we've been hearing more active, blatantly racism towards Asians. Has there been um, a trigger, do you think?
Well, there's always little triggers here that happen, and I think media and social media nowadays, with technology, the news spreads, and the way you know Asian hate crime has always been around, right? We've always it's always been there. I think in any culture, every culture experiences it. I think what's going on with the media, and if something triggers it, it brings back memories for people. Because for me, I have a different story. For my other Asian friends, they may have a different story wherever they grew up. You know, and even my parents had different stories. Where my father had to, stand in the back of the bus, but
Here?
it didn't let him. Yeah, here in the U.S. Because he came in 1956. So he would tell us stories about where there was still segregation, and he would have to stand in the back of the bus with his African American classmates and things like that. And so he experienced that as well.
Do you think COVID has been a trigger of this as well?
Well, I think with COVID, I think it it has triggered certain things, but I think it's not just in the U.S. I think around the world, because even in China, when COVID, before the name COVID was really announced, even in Chinese they would call it the Wuhan flu, right? So it identified, but then of course all the censors and media in China changed that. You could not say the word Wuhan anymore because it was censored in their media, social media platforms. So it's very, you have to, even me saying that right now, if it gets to China, it's censored. So because they didn't want to put that stigma, and well, I think wherever the disease came from or the virus came from, that's something else for people to investigate. But I could think, yes, social media. I think our government, yes, it could have helped if they didn't, use that term. But I think the fact is, people, if they have any hatred or anything against the Asian Americans or the Asian community, that was just there, and whether that fueled it even more. But I think it's really that social media aspect. I think it's, if you hear it on the news like constantly, it just brings it back up, and yeah, I mean, and it can start movements, like where we see have social media, everyone's posting, even my social media page, I say, stop Asian hate. But then that also fuels other people, or that makes people think about like what they went through as a child, and then they start thinking and adding more. And there's nothing wrong with, being an advocate and making sure people get educated, but don't feel the hate. Don't keep on feeling the hate.
So, Daniel, you were sharing offline with me some examples of what people say to Asian people, especially Chinese, um, who have the slanted eyes. Can you share some of those? Because I I have been surprised how often I hear from white people they didn't realize what they were saying was considered, off color, not right, minimizing, right? So can you give us some examples that might make some people wince?
Well, I think, growing up and, having whether it's like eyes like this or like this, and, kids, were growing up would just, do that, not knowing that it will add up, how they were, what they were doing as kids. It seemed harmless, but at the same sense, where did it come from, right? Where did that? And it's usually the social. Well, they didn't have social media at that time, so it was either television or the parenting. And when I was in middle school, I really remember, my one of my coaches in football would say, "Eng, stop slanting your eyes so you can see correctly. Focus," you know. And at that time, of course, everyone was laughing, and for me, it was like, I just had to do. For me, it was just had to do better because we looked up to our coaches, right? Our coaches really meant a lot to our lives. But then, of course, when he said that, that really, now deep down it hurt, you know. But you just brush it off, and then you just keep on playing football because that's how we are. But if there was a child that could not handle that emotionally, so that would have affected them, and then basically it could have turned them where they would be hating the coach, will be hating the American culture, and they would grow up, in a sense. So it's not just the Americans, but it's just how we portray things, and in our lives that will, you know, change us, affect
So,
us.
Daniel, do you still have people in the United States? You've just met them, you've shared a few sentences with them. Do they still say to you, "Where are you from?"
Oh yes, I actually ask that in my culture. When I see a Asian American, I like to know where their family heritage is from. So I don't say where they are actually from, but I learned to say, well, where's your family heritage? Because if they're second generation or third generation, I kind of ask, like, are they Korean heritage? Even though they don't speak now, a lot of the second and third generation, they don't speak. But I like to kind of know their history, you know.
But
But yes, I do
yeah,
get that. But I do get that. You know, where are you from? And you
like you
know,
just got off the plane yesterday, right? Even though you have an
correct.
American accent and you don't sound like somebody from Hong Kong, right?
Yes.
So, because I've read
But
that.
for me, you know, for me as an Asian American, I am proud of my heritage. Because I think because of my upbringing and my education, because my parents will always tell me, and my grandma that passed away last year, she was 104. You
Oh,
know, I remember her telling us stories about, you know, her trials, you know, going through World War II and when Japan occupied Hong Kong, and, you know, they had to
wow.
flee to China to get away, you know. So you, for me, that education is very important because I remember those roots. And I know that there's a lot of my Asian American friends that they didn't get that. You know, they weren't fortunate to go back to where their parents were from or their grandparents were from. You know, so I think that, in a sense, as Asian American education should be also brought back to remember where they kind of from, because they kind of lose their roots too. You know, and it's
Right.
unfortunate that, I guess, the white American, right? If they're from Germany or from wherever they're from Europe, they lost their roots. You know, so I think having to identify roots, and it's unfortunate. You look at the African Americans. You know, they're Americans, were like us, but they also lost roots because they were forced to come here. You know, it was a different immigration story. You know, and that education is also really critical too. You know, it'd be nice that if we all can go back to where we all came from from a country standpoint, from a location standpoint, and understand how things were brought, and everyone can be educated, and then understanding when they're in America, we're all here from different cultures to come together, and that's what, you know, why America is supposedly great, right? Is because we're all bringing different cultures together to really become that melting pot. Because I remember during school, we talked about the melting pot. You know, I don't hear it as much in the young generation, but maybe because I'm not in the education system. But yes.
Well, we try, Daniel. We have, and our mistake has been in the last couple of decades that we recognize cultures, but we chunk them. We have, you know, 16 de septiembre in September, which is one of the Independence Days of Mexico. And then we do Black History Month in February. And then we have, you know, Cinco de Mayo again in May. I'm trying to remember. We have the January Asian Lunar Celebration. But what we're trying to get to is that we have an ongoing embedded cultural piece throughout our curriculum so that those months aren't the only time you get to recognize a culture, right? And so we're all trying to get better at that. I was in the legislature, 2 days ago. I was down in Austin listening to some bills, and there's a bill that's being proposed for ethnic studies to make it mandatory. So that push is coming, and I think that that, you know, as an educator, I would welcome that. We do a lot of that already, but to recognize it to where it's mandatory, where the state recognizes the importance, I think that would add a lot of value to many of our communities. Now, what advice do you give parents who, you know, who are not Asian, and you know, what should they be saying, doing in the home that you feel might help lead to kids growing up who are less apt to give these racist statements without understanding the power that they have?
Well, I think there's probably an easy way, is through food. If parents, because I know a lot of Americans, they're not very adventurous. They don't try different types of food, right? And I think if parents will go try different Asian foods and bring their kids to learn about the different foods and not just eat the same thing, you know. Like my kids eat Chick-fil-A like it's, you know, yeah. But I try to immerse them with different foods, right? And my son, you know, now I'm having a hard time for him to have Chinese food now, you know. The only thing he eats is fried rice. I mean, and yeah, and that's not Chinese food. But my youngest daughter, you know, she eats everything right now, and hopefully that will, you know, she'll continue that. And my oldest daughter, she loves different types of food as well, you know. But even my wife, she doesn't like to have Indian food. I don't know if it's just the flavor of the spices, but I think food could actually help solve a lot of things. I mean, you think about it, if the American society can and bring their kids to try different foods, whether it's Latin American food, Asian food, Russian food, I mean, all different types. Because, you know, we have the big Italian culture, right? Because New York, a lot of Italian immigrants. So we have a lot of Italian food in the U.S. And then, of course, French food and German, and depending on the location, right? We don't really experience a lot of German food, depending where we're at. So I think if you ask me because I'm not an educator, but I think I'm more of a foodie, but I think food could solve some of the problems.
Well, and
because
you know,
you're getting educated, right?
you brought up some good memories. I remember taking my family. I have three kids, 2 boys and a girl, and I took them when they were in their teens to an Indian restaurant. I loved Indian even back then, because Singapore was back then in 1972 was 4% Indian, and so
yep.
you know that we already were starting to eat Indian food back then, and so my kids were very fussy about that. They were not happy that I brought them to an Indian restaurant, but we were able to find some gateway dishes. Chana masala, chicken masala, I think is a gateway meal to the stronger Indian food, because it's a very rich, mild dish, right?
Yes.
And it opened the door. My daughter now makes chicken tikka masala for her own kids who are 3, 5, and 10. So,
yeah,
but it took dragging them there out of the American, you know, white culture, and you know, because I grew up overseas and grew up in so many different cultures, I was able to bring those foods to them relatively early in their life, and they. I love the fact that they want to go to Indian restaurants with me now, and now they're old enough they even pay the bill sometimes. Yeah,
you're making me hungry. I'm like subconsciously I'm going to be thinking about Indian food today.
So are there any trainings? I know there have been Asian groups that are sort of forming and getting very organized as far as resources and trainings that one can tap into. Do you know any off the top of your head?
Well, I know that, you know, there's different nonprofit organizations helping immigrants, you know, adapt to the U.S. culture, you know, and I think if Americans, whether it's second generation Asian American, I think, you know, people who can help those immigrants, you'll get to learn their culture and help them out. But program wise, I don't know what other programs on the educational side, because I'm part of a lot of Asian chambers, but it's more about business. It doesn't really talk about the culture, you know.
Okay. Well, there are starting to be, I saw on NPR an article called In Response to Anti-Asian Hate Incidents, Groups Step Up to Trainings for Bystanders. And I think that's a wake-up call for everyone, because we've had, you know, we've seen a couple of incidences where we've had people not do anything, grown men not do anything when an Asian woman is attacked. And so a lot of that is, not all of it, but some of that can be blamed on the fact that a lot of people have never witnessed this type of incident. And when they do, it freezes them, you know, just like and somebody sees a fight for the first time in their life and they go, I froze, I didn't know what to do. And so now we're starting to see trainings on bystander training. And we, of course, that's for adults. Now, we've been doing that in the schools for decades, right? We, being an ally, don't let other kids be bullied, step up, step in, all that stuff. So we've been training kids for years, but
yeah,
so adults don't apply that. If they had that growing up, in schools, they're not applying it to real life situations that they're seeing and that they're, and I say part of, because if you're witnessing something, it's you're now part of it, and you have got to do something, whether it's call the police, call 911 right then. If you're a small woman and you see males attacking somebody, you might think you can't intervene physically, but there are things that one should do, and we all need to be responsible for each other. And so,
right. So I mean, yeah, it comes back to that humanity level where
yes.
we are all humans and we need to help each other out and not have this I mean, the sense of being selfish in a sense, like it's not my problem. Shut the door. I saw that video and
Yes.
it was shocking, and
She's been
it's
fired, by the way.
whether, yeah,
She's
I
been
mean,
fired.
and it's just the whole group of people, right? It wasn't just one person there. There was other people, and imagine on the streets, right? I mean, I think that was in the East Coast, so I mean, there's people around, so it wasn't. So
yeah,
and
well,
even on the subway, you saw things on the subway, and just everyone will take out their phone. That's the culture. It's like take out your phone, video, and it's on social media. But like, yeah, it's just unfortunate.
Well, as you were talking, I was sort of, when you were talking about melting pot, it's almost like we've been this melting pot of cultures in the United States for decades, but it's like the white culture got to stir the pot. Now other cultures want to turn at that same sort of power framework and the benefits that come with it. And that's where things have gotten uncomfortable. And it seems like the white community is sort of pushing back and saying no. And I think it's just too late. It's now training the white culture to say, no, we're all going to have to learn to share that power structure because we're not going back into the box that you put us in.
Correct. I mean that's correct, because when you're first starting, right, everyone's coming in, everyone's trying to survive, and usually first immigrants are known not to say much, right? They just want to survive. They're in a different, and now the second, third generation, we're voicing our voices now, and we're still taught, as a child, like, oh, just do good, just do your work, don't get involved in politics or whatnot, or don't volunteer, just do your own thing. But that needs to change in our Asian American culture as second, third generation immigrants, even the Latin American culture, and the African American groups that, I mean, well, even within the African Americans, you do have immigrants coming in, from Africa, and there's a clash there too, right?
Sure.
So just being educated and not making fun of the Africans that are coming over, because I know there are tensions there too. So it's not just the white Americans, it's everyone, right? Like we all need to have some kind of education and not make fun of, like, we shouldn't make fun of the white Americans either as an Asian, right? So it goes both ways. But yes, predominantly, I think I don't know. I think food solves everything. Think about it. When you ask me, like, what can we do? What can we do? The only thing I can think is food.
Let's go eat together, right? Yeah. Well, Daniel, thank you so much. I want you to know the schools are trying to work hard on it. I know our school district is having an Asian Awareness Month, and they have asked for videos from different Asian culture people to share with the kids at school. I mean, we have a Chinese program, a Mandarin Chinese, as part of our dual language program. And so, but these are my, Chinese teachers who really want to make their students aware of other Asian cultures. So we really are working on that and in the schools, but now we got to work on our adult populations as well.
Yes.
So thank you for helping us.
So
in.
yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you. So in the schools, I know that they have the different themes of different countries. So are they doing any food education as well?
We do. Matter of fact, most schools do this where they have Multicultural Night. And gosh, we've been doing that. I think we did it in April of every year until last year with COVID. But we would invite the families, especially in Plano. Plano is our more multicultural school. Our school tends to be more Hispanic and African American, and about 4% Anglo there. But we have more Asian, African, and so forth, along with Hispanic and African American with our Plano school. But we would invite the parents to come dressed in their heritage garb and to bring a dish to share. And so the kids would sing songs from different areas of the world and put on a program. They would also have a parade of nations where they would carry the flag, and many times the kids were also dressed in their heritage garb. And so they would be carrying a flag and dressed to represent their country. And then after the parade, after the show, they would have a big spread. And that was the favorite part, of course.
Yes, yes.
So very much so we do that. And again, we know food is a way into people's hearts.
Yeah, I mean, so you look at it, you said that's really in the Plano area, but the other schools around the country, in remote areas, right? In Texas, just if you look at Texas, so the other cities and the other schools, what are they doing? And I think that's where that needs to be pushed as well.
Yeah, that's our challenge.
It's very easy to do.
That's right. That's right. Okay, Daniel. Well, you challenged us to bring at least Chinese food, if not food from several other Asian countries, to our students, and transition them into worldwide citizens who treat each other kinder because they've shared a dish. So thank you for that.
Yes.
We'll let you go now.
Breaking bread.
That's right, together.
Thank you.
Well, we'll let you go, and thank you so much. Talk soon. All right, well, that was delightful. And yes, we're all hungry now. But, being able to work on ourselves so that we're more accepting of everybody. I think Daniel made that pretty clear. He was pretty inclusive. He wasn't just saying the the Asian community, but we all need to be inclusive of all communities. And so I thought that was, really spot on. So thank you, Daniel. Let's see, I thought I would talk a little bit about this article from NPR about, in response to anti-hate incidents, groups step up to trainings for bystanders. So it says here, we've been operating in an environment where Asian American community has been experiencing heightened anxiety and fear over more than the last year, says Marita Etkubanez, Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. We recognize there was a need for training, education, but also tactics that people could readily put to use. Through free webinar trainings, Valdez and Etkubanez laid out a number of tactics, which they called the 5 Ds. They shared some of those tactics with NPR during an interview with All Things Considered. So here they are. Distract. Creating a distraction is a way to de-escalate a situation. Excellent. You could be walking by people who are experiencing the conflict, and you could pretend to be clumsy and drop a bottle of water or a cup of coffee. Everybody's backing up because they don't want to get wet. And you could pretend that you know the person who's experiencing conflict and just walk up to them and say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry I'm late. You're creating a safe space around them. How about delegate? In short, get help from somebody else. Maybe it's somebody who presents a physically bigger presence. Get somebody bigger who could step in and intervene on your behalf. If you're a small female, but you see a bigger male, you could, again, as I talked with Daniel, sometimes people freeze. They're just not used to conflict right in front of their eyes, and they don't know what to do. But maybe somebody else does, and so you're urged, the bigger person is urged to intervene. If you're on public transit, it could be the bus driver or transit security. Enlist others to help. As you're considering intervening, you wouldn't be alone. Document. Filming a conflict can be useful, especially if you can include street signs or other landmarks to note the date and time, but Hollerbeck recommends only doing so from a safe distance and not posting any video online without the permission of the targeted person. Good advice, or maybe before getting it to the police. Delay. Banez calls this the lowest stakes form of intervention. This is where you can approach the person after the conflict has passed, check in, make sure they're okay, and if they need help, get them help, offer to sit with them until help comes. But that's, that's after the fact. So hopefully we can do something before that. And direct. Before directly intervening, establish your own safety first. If the situation does escalate into physical violence or medical attention is needed, then yes, we need to recommend people call the proper authorities to deal with the situation. So here, again, let me mention them again because they're good. Distract, cause of distraction, or go up to them and say, hi, I'm sorry I'm late, as if you knew them. Delegate, get help from somebody else. Document, film it. Delay, which is help afterwards. And direct, which is before directly intervening, make sure you're safe. Okay, you can, we don't need two people hurt during that conflict. So, again, little reminders of interventions that you can do. And that's not just for adults. Kids can do the same thing in bullying situations, but good advice. The last few minutes, what I'd like to do is chat about my experience in the Capitol this week. And so to do that, I'd like to bring on our advocacy expert, Miss Kathy Ward. And Kathy, I want to share a couple of, you've been on before as our advocacy expert. And
I don't know, expert, let's put a disclaimer.
Oh, there are few who have your credentials as far as
Thank you.
Your political work.
Thank
you. First I wanted to share a couple of bills that I heard that I think would excite you, but then I want to talk about how people can get more involved. And so
yes.
The first bill that I know you're going to love is that they're hoping to not only enforce the student ID on for kids at school, right? A student ID, right. Everybody has to wear, but on the back of it, it would be mandatory suicide prevention number.
Oh, I have not heard that. I love that.
It's a bill that's pending.
Oh my goodness.
I can't imagine that they wouldn't vote it in. I cannot imagine.
That needs to be bipartisan support. I just recently, with the family that was the mass murder suicide in Allen, Texas, just literally right down the street from both you and I, it made me, because on Friday on JP, Kathy, and the crew, we're going to be talking about that. And so I did some research into the National Suicide it's not hotline now, it's Lifeline. They even have an app, so it can be, you can just text somebody, I need help, or help me, or anything. So for kids to have that access and that constant reminder, oh my God, you made my
around their neck.
Passes. I hope that passes.
And then the other one was the one that I alluded to with Daniel, and that's the ethnic studies. The studies would, and I think it's probably generations late, but forcing the schools, and I hate to say forcing, asking the schools, mandating the schools to bring ethnic studies into our schools. And it's never been more needed, right?
Well, and it's interesting. And Daniel, what a fantastic guest. What a great discussion. I hope y'all keep that going. Um, he brought up food. So if my stomach growls, that's one thing. That's an easy in. Um, and I started thinking about my childhood, and it made me, after this show, I'm going to go and look up. Remember Schoolhouse Rock, which
Mhm.
is
Sure.
I still love it as an adult. And I learned a ton as a kid, and so did my kids from Schoolhouse Rock. They had a song called The Great American Melting Pot, and I remember that. I want to go back and see if that one's appropriate nowadays, and maybe that's something we can get out there again, because growing up as a kid, in the 70s, we were, and I think what Daniel said about it starting at home, I think that's the majority of it. But we grew up with things like that, and we were able to talk about it, and it was no big deal. Our best friends were from all different walks of life. What has happened that we've moved so far backwards?
Yeah. I don't get it either. But of course, growing up overseas, that I did, I think
Right.
I don't have a normal white American mentality, and
Right.
so I wanted to ask you, as I was down in Austin, wondering my government at work, so to speak. I thought we needed to maybe chat and begin the conversation. We can't get it all done today. Begin the conversation. How can people deepen their advocacy work? And so some people are Republicans, some people are Democrat. What people need to do to become a little bit more involved in their party, if they even
Right.
have a party. I mean, what do you do for the beginner future voter,
Right.
adult, or whether a late teen? What is your suggestion for them to start doing?
Well, and again, I think some of this comes from home. I know Brandy Braley, who's one of your teachers on one of your legacy campuses, she's doing activities with these, freshmen, with kids while they're young, telling them, hey, you know what? You have access to these people. They work for you, not the other way around. And I think as parents at home, we need to express, first of all, I mean, let's face it, unless it's a big old presidential election, or, I'm going to say it, I hope this is appropriate for a Sunday show, unless alcohol's on the ballot, in a city council race, you're lucky if you get 10% voter turnout. That's
Yeah.
pathetic. I mean, we can do, again, that's one of these things we can do so much better. So I think parents, letting their kids know voting is a duty. It's a right. I mean, my goodness, women, you and I in other countries would be stoned for getting in line to vote. We wouldn't have that option. So, and heck, in America, women have only been voting for a short 100 years. So we need to be very grateful of this opportunity. So then you take it a step further. Well, who am I voting for? It is so easy to research candidates nowadays. And if you don't want to get involved in party politics, that's the route I took. I got very heavily involved in party politics, and that's how I came to meet people and came to run for office. But you don't have to. Go and schedule a meeting with your elected official. Congressman Van Taylor, who I know he's a dear friend of yours, 100% meeting policy. The majority of the elected officials you and I are friends with, they absolutely, if you want to meet with them, they will make that possible for you. So just take that time, and then you can do things. And as a matter of fact, I'll put it on your feed. There's a link that Senator Paxton was talking about the other day where you can get bill alerts. If I'm just concerned about the Second Amendment, or if I just want to know about education issues, or even more specific, I just want to know about special education issues, I can get alerts that tell me, hey, first, here's the bill. So I can determine, is this a good bill or is this a bad bill? And then I can contact the people who are on that committee. I can contact the Speaker of the House. I can contact the governor and the lieutenant governor. I can contact my personal state senator and my personal state representative. And it really doesn't take much time. It can be an email, it can be a phone call, sometimes it can be a text. So I think I just encourage people to reach out and develop those relationships, because they'll listen, because there are so few people who are involved in the process.
Well, that's the scary part, is that they are only listening to a small minority of people who are angry about something or passionate about something.
Yep.
And it's the only voice that the legislator hears.
Right.
And, you know,
Then what are they going to do? You're right. If you know,
right.
and it's really kind of sad that it gets to the point where you're right. It's kind of, was it that saying, the squeaky wheel gets,
Yes,
or something? I always mess up those sayings.
it's the oil. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So it's one of those things that if you've got a group that's super angry, that may sway a committee vote by that one vote that determines if that bill gets out of committee. And I'm so sorry, my puppy's in the room with me. She's had
the puppy's hungry, right?
She's had an upset stomach, so she's like, "Why haven't you fed me yet?" And we're like, "Because you were up all night with issues." But anyways, and she's very passionate. But then also, you know, you've got the people who get mad after the fact. Something you're very good at, and you and myself have done this for a long time. You have to talk to your representatives even before they go to Austin. Especially, we're in session right now, and as you pointed out on your show, we've got only 6 months every 2 years that our legislators meet. So meet with them during the other 18 months. And,
you know,
ask them, you know, say, "Hey, this is important to me," or "This is important to me," and ask them what can be, you know, what can be done.
And I want to remind people that our legislators, some of them, not all, unfortunately, have made communication so easy. Van Taylor, for example, has phone calls. And so you don't even need a computer.
Right.
You know, he has a huge phone call that he does and talks over the issues. He will meet pre-COVID. I went to his taco breakfast when he had them. And
Absolutely.
So, you know, and you know what he does? He doesn't talk to the whole group. And I don't know if I sort of like it or not, but I get it both ways. He sits at every table.
Right.
He takes 5 to 7 minutes and sits at every table. So if it's crowded and you came a little bit later, you're the last one he comes to. But at least it's a more personalized visit versus being talked to from the front of the room. So, you know, but the man is trying. He is just killing himself trying to make sure he votes with the will of his people.
That's true. And you know, and it's one of those things. Yes, he is elected, and he's a Republican, but he reaches across party lines. And it's interesting that you brought up that breakfast. Those are what I believe one of those. It was a breakfast or a type of, you know, coffee gathering like that, where he learned about this issue about women being able to carry pumped breast milk in an airplane or onto the airplane and not have to worry about, you know, like if you're drinking a Diet Coke or a coffee. I'm so sorry, Kira. Get about
You're fine. I'm pretending I don't hear it. Everybody else will too.
I know, they're like, "Do you have a dolphin or a bird in there?" It's a dog. But it's one of those things where that was huge. Now women across the country who are pumping and who need to take that breast milk with them for their baby, they don't have to worry about dumping it out or throwing it away when they go through the security check. That came from a breakfast where he was talking to people, and a mom said, "Hey, this is a problem." And I've got other ladies my age who are in the same situation who have this issue. So don't be afraid to have those conversations.
Well, you know, thank you for, again, because this is why I'm here, right? I like to bring the current events, but advocacy and making sure that we all become a stronger voice with our legislators is part of my work. And so thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
We hope that everyone left a little bit more educated in some of the good things that are going on in the public ed world. I shared strategies on how to handle not only anti-Asian, but just any hate actions that you're seeing that you unfortunately are walking by or part of. Daniel Eng was very good to remind us that, the Asian community is represented by many different cultures. And so even they have to learn how to work that melting pot together, just like we all have to. And so let's just all work on being kinder to each other and stepping in when it's time to intervene in a anger situation. All right, everyone, thank you again for being on. We hope that it was a fast hour for you as it was for me. And again, leave your comments and questions in the comment section, and I'll be happy to respond. Take care, everyone. See you next time.